online for authors. I'm chatting with Ben Hawken, author of Chandelier. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for having me. This is going to be great. I'm really excited.
I am excited too. I enjoyed the book. It had me on the edge several times. I loved the whole idea. But before we really get into it and delve into the whys and wherefores of the book, can you give us like a quick elevator pitch? What are people going to find when they open up the cover?
The thing that I found most interesting about this book was something that was pointed out to me only after it was done, which is someone said there wasn't a bad guy in the book. There wasn't the traditional antagonist. And I thought about that for a second. And I guess the antagonist in this one is the fact that life happens, like stuff happens, like we all are trying our best and we're all doing the best we can with the 60% of all the information that we have. And everyone can come to different conclusions with that information. And that, it's in that gray area that all the problems start and where problems can be solved. And now that I'm hearing myself say it, not a great elevator pitch, but I like the idea of it being like, most of us don't have a traditional bad guy in our lives.
Right.
Each of us have a lot of challenges. And I like the idea of having a family-centered story that you could see that no matter how tight that nucleus was, how that crisis that they're encountering can ripple out and swirl around them. And so it was a story that to me was uniquely personal in a lot of ways, except so much of the book is spent at a national level or a global level. And you keep seeing how things can shrink down and expand. So as I was writing it, I was never completely clear on what was exactly going to happen next. And I think that makes it fun for the reader as well.
Yeah. Well, and so that immediately says that you're a pantser. So you don't sit and have a plot and know what's going on. Is that correct?
So what I did was come up with about 40 pages, which sounds like a lot, but considering the book ended up being about 550, I guess it's not a ton, but I had about 40 pages of rough outline for how I wanted A to connect to B and so on. But within the gaps between each of those milestones, it was completely up in the air how that dot was going to connect to the next one. So I gave myself just enough room to ad lib and to just kind of sit back and see where it was going. But I knew roughly up through like the 90% mark, I knew where I wanted it to head ultimately.
So I want to know, as an author, I love knowing like where your idea originated from. So like, how did you come up with this idea of using like a brain abnormality in children as part of a government research project, right? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah. My story is probably similar to yours and to most people who are authors who are listening, which is I got home from a concert at 2 a.m. and I'd eaten too much to fall asleep. So I was on my phone watching YouTube short conspiracy theory videos when I came across, so far very relatable.
Right. Yeah.
And as I was flipping through these, I came across one, which was a guy who'd been part of what was a real program we know it existed, called the Stargate program, which is they dosed 12-year-olds with LSD to try to see if they could project their minds into Soviet headquarters or the KGB and read, the names of secret material or secret spies like off the walls or out of like books that were left open on desks. And that was a real thing our government did from the 50s through the 80s. And I thought to myself, like and then until they shut it down. And it occurred to me, because I have 4 kids and they're all fairly young. And I thought to myself, geez, that means that one day a 12-year-old was at a lab there in the Bay Area and a laboratory there. And they woke up that morning believing, because they'd been told, you're the most important asset in the US military because of what we're training your brain to be able to do. And then it all got shut down one day and they went to bed that night being told, hey, our bad. We've never actually gotten any results. None of this was ever real. I'm like, what would that do to a kid? Like, how do you come home and explain that to your parents? Like, how do the parents rectify, like, geez, we've had our kid living in a lab, because these were all kids with normal lives. And so they went back home. And what does that do to the parent who's like, I guess my kid isn't a sophisticated weapon for the US government fighting the communism? Like, that's just got to turn everyone's head inside out a little bit. And how do you grow up and then relate to other adults and, trust people again and all of that? And I was just sitting there thinking like, wow, that's crazy. Is this a social media post? Is this just a Facebook comment? And then, well, it's a long Facebook comment. And then I just wrote down a couple of ideas. And Terry, that is where the avalanche happened, because I just was dictating into the notes app on my phone for 3 hours. And it just kept kind of spiraling and growing. And I came across, actually, like a couple of weeks ago, that original brain dump of here's what I think could happen. And 75% of it ended up being about where the book went. I didn't know how it was going to end at that point, but it started in that very, very relatable way.
That happens to me. I'll listen to a song. Someone will ask me a question. I was on the beach one day and I picked up something and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if that was a message in a bottle? Ooh, and the next thing you know, your mind's going places. I like the fact that it often starts with something that is real or true or has a kernel of truth to it. And then we play the what if game. Well, what would that have looked like if? Well, what would happen if?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ifs. And originally I was writing it from the perspective of the dad. No shock there. And then I realized how much more interesting it was from the kid's perspective. And my wife she was a very eclectic, eccentric, wonderful child from all the stories I've heard. And so I basically just used the 40 or 50 most, let's call them idiosyncratic stories I heard about her as a child. And that kind of became the main character. And for those who haven't read it yet, the story, there's one single main character through it. And the story for the first 15 chapters bounces back and forth between the 1980s and then the present day, watching this character grow up. And a lot of that so whenever I'm asked about, would you really think an 8 or a 9 or a 10-year-old could do all the things that, or thrive
in those things or thrive, right?
Yeah, I'm like, well, I know me at 8, no, but I know one 8-year-old who could have.
Right, right. And so when I was reading it, I never found it unbelievable. I found it, you're talking about, this kid, they find that she has this abnormality in the way her brain's growing. They tell her that she's going to be able to communicate with the Russians or at least catch their communications. Like she's almost an antenna, right? And I'm thinking, like, if I were 8 and somebody said that to me, man, I'd be all in. Like, how cool is that? Make me somebody really cool. And even if I'm not allowed to tell anyone, knowing that I look at what I'm doing. So there wasn't anything that happened that I didn't see. Maybe some kids know, but isn't that true, period? Like even with adults. Yeah, it's like, would an adult ever do that? Well, some would, some wouldn't, right? What?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I did want to always root it in it being plausible, if not likely, at least plausible. And furthermore, that was then, and I'm glad you picked up on one of the plots, one of the sub themes, I guess, that came up pretty early on, which was how we find ourselves as everyday people, but certainly when there are these exceptional events, like explained in the book, we find ourselves sometimes doing something not because we wanted to do it or because we had a goal, but we were just swept up. We just got caught up in something. And in this story, here's this girl who has this, like you said, this abnormality in her brain, which doesn't cause her any problems, except it's like a broken antenna that can pick up stray pieces of a signal. And when she's explained, hey, you have this gift or you have this abnormality and we'd love to work with you to help, protect freedom, however it was being phrased at the time. And to her, it's like, that sounds very exciting. I'm interested in doing it for just interesting reasons. Her parents, who are hearing the neurologist telling her these things, the dad is immediately like, hell yeah, freedom, let's do it.
Right.
I mean, even if she hadn't been on board, the enthusiasm of the people around her is going to sweep her up. And she's dealing with, I'd also like to do this. My parents are super gung-ho. I'd like to do a nice thing for the country I live in.
Right.
Does the country I live in have my best interests in mind? Do my parents really care about me or do they care about this? There's a lot of those little things that I try to play those out throughout the rest of the book so they pay off at the end.
Right. The thing that I had the most problem with is being a mom, and I have 4 children.
Right.
It's like, you'd be hard pressed to let you take my kid. I don't know you.
Yeah, it would have been a hard pass for me. It's like, absolutely not. Like maybe my child can do like a home study, fight the enemy course at home, but we're not sending you away.
Maybe I can bring him or her by, once a week for an hour and I'll sit in the lab and watch. Like, I don't know. I'd be a little more hard pressed to just say, sure, have my kid. But, we're also dealing with a time where, they were talking about it's Russians and Russians are going to come in and, everyone was terrified. Right. I mean, this was the Cold War when Russia was the enemy. it was the one you were worried about, right? And so if someone said, hey, we have a chance to defeat them and your kid can do it, I guess there is that little bit of pride, like, wow, this is my kid going to do it. Absolutely.
So it was your parents pushing you along in something,
right?
And it was culture pushing you along. It was
exactly.
pride, it was patriotism, it was all the things in the zeitgeist. And, you will eventually find yourself in the midst of something that was not entirely of your own making, but how you extricate yourself, that's completely up to you. The zeitgeist isn't going to help you land softly on the other side.
No, it's
and
not.
That was a big part of the thinking that went into the plot.
So I'm also a nerd, a complete science nerd, and I had a wonderful time. You had these different teachers come in and out of this camp. Right. So she ends up going to the camp, and they have these different teachers that come in and out. They're scientists, and they end up teaching these kids. And you often explained cool, sciencey kind of things that are going on. And I loved it. Like I said, there's a little bit of a nerd in me, so I really enjoyed it. Let's talk a little bit about research. Mm-hmm. How much of what you were saying is real, and how much research did that take to pull that into the book?
Yeah, there was a lot of nerd stuff in there, as you point out, which also just shows you the things that I'm interested in when I'm not writing a book. I mean, so much of these things are just, so much of writing is what you find interesting. I mean, we're all writing these books for ourselves mostly. I mean, in Stephen King's memoir, he makes the comment that all novels are just a letter to someone. Sometimes that person is you. Sometimes you're exposing more of yourself. Like we can talk about this later, but there's a lot of pieces in this book where different characters have backstories that are uncomfortably autobiographical.
Oh yeah.
And but you mentioned the camp they go to, this place where all these kids who have the same abnormality go to then do this work and try to listen in on Russian interference. And yeah, there's a cycle of teachers who come through because you have to be a certain kind of secret to be able to come to even this camp. You got to keep educating these kids so that if they come in at 8 and they leave at 12, they still have a basic education. And yeah, every teacher seems to have a different point of view. And I went dramatically out of my way to make sure everything those teachers are saying is rooted in something real. Like those are real. You can go in and Google all of those things. I certainly did. And similarly, the science behind what's going on with their brains or the machinery they're using to kind of, put the nodes on the person's forehead and listen along. All of that is real as to what existed in 1989, 90, 91 when all that was existing. So I got to tell you, this book could have been written 10 months sooner were it not for all the research I had to do to make sure these essentially elementary school teachers who are saying wild stuff, if that weren't all accurate.
Yeah, like I said, I'm such a science nerd, and so I'm reading it going, ooh, I love it. I really got a kick out of those things. And I once again thought I would have loved to have been a child in a classroom in which those kinds of discussions came up, instead of, this is what the author said and this is what the author meant, and let the kids like ask questions and do all of that. It was really cool. And I had a high school experience like that, but not elementary. And I just thought, wouldn't it have been cool, or wouldn't it be cool really today if kids had that opportunity to really like deep dive into subjects that were interesting to them?
Yeah, there was so many of those stories. I tried to make every story or every lesson that you hear in the classroom be like 1/100th of the final puzzle that you're going to get to at the end. So, so the readers sometimes will notice like, oh, when they mention this thing in the classroom in chapter 12, that actually is something that gets said out loud in chapter 45, and which is completely accurate. But it was also just so much. I was basically writing chapter 47 and chapter 12 in parallel, just making sure that things there would line up as a result. And yeah, it was, there's so many of those little pieces and those lessons that I'm writing them and I'm like, okay, this is interesting to me. How would a person much smarter than me explain it to a 9-year-old? So there was also that extra hurdle.
Exactly. It's like, how do you, I don't want to say dumb it down as though 9-year-olds aren't intelligent, but how do you bring it down to a level for a 9-year-old with less experience with life, less understanding of some of these basic concepts, are going to grasp what this person is talking about. And really, quite frankly, for a good number of adults who also are reading it, who are going, oh, good, now I have a basic understanding of this that I wouldn't have had otherwise, which I found really interesting.
And that's exactly it. That ended up being a blessing in disguise for me, because that way, when I was explaining it to 9-year-olds, not never, but it's very rare that an adult is going to get lost in the fray
Yes.
once you have it explained to that level. So that really helped. In the first draft, I was not talking to 9-year-olds. I was just writing as fast as I could. And I had a friend of mine read through it. And he's like, bro, I did not understand a thing that happened in the classroom. And I'm like, okay. Second and third draft,
yes,
we're going to make it appropriate for 9-year-olds.
Right.
And that way, the reader has this backlog of really sophisticated concepts in their head by the time they get to the end of the book and they need them. But it's at a 8 and 9 and 10-year-old level. So that ended up narratively really saving me. That was a happy point there.
Yeah, and you did a good job with it being in a classroom. So it wasn't just like, I've read some books by as young authors, young as in terms of how many books that they've written, who do information dump. And then they get on with the story, and then an information dump and get on with the story. And you have to be careful that you don't do that. You've got all of this great research and you want to put it in, but you have to find, how do you include it in a way that it's part of the story? And having a teacher come in and teach these classes, and essentially she's remembering, or we see her, in this classroom. And so it was a fun way to get all of this important scientific information without it just being
It's sure true. And this is a tip to writers everywhere. If you need 5 or 6 exposition dumps, have a flashback to a classroom. It hides it so well.
Right. A classroom, sometimes a conversation, like just find a way to include it without it being just information dump. Because information dumps, I don't know how other people read, but I tend to go flip, up. We're back to the story. And then I miss important things that I need. So I really need that information to be part of the story, or short.
Yeah.
Short enough that I don't start going, where is the story? I want the story. So you did a good job with it. I enjoyed that part.
The other part about information dumps too, that because they have to happen, but I learned between the second and third and then ultimately in the fourth rewrite that they don't have to happen all at once, and they don't have to happen in order. There was so many improvements I made by having part 4 of the information you need happen first in chapter 12, and then you get part 2 in chapter 15, you get part 1 in chapter 16, and then 10 chapters, then you finally get part 3. That we as the authors, we know the story, and it's antithetical to us to tell it out of order, but we get information out of order all the time. We're really good at reassembling it, and it's actually more fun when you finally see, like, this doesn't make sense, and then you get part 3 last, and you're like,
there we go. It's all together.
And that is readers really enjoy getting to feel that feeling of connecting the dots. It's like seeing the ending coming. If you can give them little wins like that along the way, they're a lot more engaged readers afterwards.
Absolutely. So you said, you alluded to it, so you have to talk about it now, that there were some of you, uncomfortably where are you in this book? So you had to point to some of the characters and things they're doing. Where are you?
Yeah. The main character in the book, the woman Sienna Barrett, and she is like I said, as a child, all the stories I heard about my wife from her telling them and her siblings. The adult version of her bears almost no resemblance because the plot needed her to be different things. But the husband has quite a bit of me, in the sense that here was someone who was as a child had a lot of ideas and a lot of energy, and flaked his way through high school, and then suddenly watched everyone leave his hometown to go to college and do things. And he looked around at the end of the summer after senior year of high school and said, "Oh, man, I did not plan ahead for this. I'm by myself in my hometown. Guess I'll go to community college." And I don't know. What do you do? What comes after community college? I don't think anyone who's ever stepped foot in a community college knows. And so that left a lasting impression on that character, as it did me, saying, I'm never, ever going to not plan 7 or 8 steps ahead ever again. And so there is a lot. So we see in the book that the husband in the book is constantly scrambling he sees a wave coming toward the family, and he is not the type to think, okay, as soon as the wave lands on us, we'll figure out how to swim.
Yeah, he's like, okay, we're taking care of it today.
We're taking care of it today. Even if we could wait until tomorrow to take care of it, we're still going to take care of it today, and we're going to work through the night. then also having, that character has a lot of, one of the themes that comes up is you can have everything, all the creature comforts that you think you need, and all of the social support and the system around you and the people around you. But when you really have a crisis, how many people can you count on in that moment? And chances are, no matter how popular we are or how rich our social network is, our like in-person social network, you are going to end up being the one who has to solve most of your own problems yourself. Yeah. And I don't think that's an indictment of society as much as just when the chips go down, the circle of trust gets really small. And then similarly,
the circle of trust is small. And then I think too that you're looking at everyone else also has lives. Yeah. And they also have their things that are going on, and they can't necessarily just drop their things to come after your things. And so a lot of times it is kind of like, yeah, I mean, if they had time, they would do it, but they don't. And it's on me, like, Yeah.
Yeah. And there was and similarly to on that point, you think about the central crisis that this family faces. They're midway through the book where they have to, I'm not going to spoil anything, but they need to drop off the radar a little bit for a little while. I mean, that is not a activity that you're going to take your best friend Ron and your best friend Kevin with you, right? I mean, it's going to be as many people as are blood related. It's going to be basically your number of children plus your spouse plus you is the math equation to come up with how many people are in that circle. And, that is a really difficult thing to do. And then doing that while second guessing yourself, and very rationally so. Like in this book, the dad and the mom are constantly second guessing themselves while still moving forward. They don't necessarily have the paralysis of choice, but what they're doing is on paper, it's ridiculous, but they are doing the best they have with the information available to them. And that's another theme is, no, I don't think the husband and wife ever tell each other the whole truth. I think they hover around 80 to 90% of truth at all times, which also gives the reader an opportunity to question how, what truth level are they operating at all times? I think we all want 100%, but don't we all kind of operate at 85%? Whether like, hey,
like you want to believe that you tell your spouse everything.
Yeah.
And
or your kids or your closest people around you, or like, why are we doing this?
Try to do most of the time. But I mean, there are those things. I mean, I can think of things that it's like, I don't know that I've like purposefully kept it, like thought about keeping it, but I haven't brought it up.
There it is. There it is. Hasn't brought it up. And this book is filled with scenarios where things just aren't brought up. And there's a ripple effect of that. Yeah, there's a ripple effect of that that's highly negative, but there's also people leaving out things because they need to survive.
Right. I think that it was very interesting. So that kind of does bring us to it's a great story. So if you want to read a book with a great story, this is it. Did you have another purpose in mind? When you were done, did you push away and say, I hope readers take this away when they're done reading this?
I came at the story from a really interesting or really unusual direction, which is I had not read fiction since high school, since it was being assigned to me. I mean, I read Tolkien and I read the classics, and my wife is a literature teacher. So when her class would go and read one of the classics, I would usually just read it too in the background. And that got me up to speed on some of those. But really since age 12, when I found out about anthropology and history books, that's just what I had read all along. So that was a weird angle to approach fiction from, and a literary fiction, narrative driven story. And when I got to the very end of it, in one sense, I was like really emotionally drained. And then on the other one, I started going back through because I had read Stephen King's memoir in between the second to last and the last draft, where he said like all these novels are letters. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who the letter
was. Who were you writing to?
Yeah.
So did you make a decision? Who did you write it to?
In the acknowledgments in the book, there's a stray comment in there about how I came to the conclusion that it was me, and how embarrassing that was, and how truly, truly weird that was. But I mentioned some of the autobiographical parts in there. I really was sorting through some of those past episodes, not in a processing of trauma kind of way, but when I used those autobiographical pieces to help tell the story, and I was seeing the words appear on the screen, I'm like, I never thought about it this way before. Like there was a lot of opportunities to process those things. And commercially productive ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people, because people have asked me before, I've written novels, and they'll say, so like, are you in any of your books? And it's like, oh yeah, like I'm in all of them. And I'm either me as I used to be, me as I am now. Sometimes I'm me as I wish I were, like there's a lot, I don't know how to write without putting myself out into it. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. Like how would you create a character that doesn't at least have some connection to you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I was my daughter just finished 8th grade, and she's the only member of the family who has read it like cover to cover. I think my now, granted, my wife is a literature teacher. This probably doesn't reach her particular standards, although I think she read most of it as well and was very kind as she read it. But when my 8-year-old read it and then wrote me like multiple pages of notes about her reactions, and one of her notes was, you write it just like you talk. It's very distracting. Like I could never get into the story because this is just my dad writing things. This isn't a novel. Right. Like I hear this guy talk all day.
Isn't that funny? So my children are all older. I have 4 children, and they are 27 and up. So, I have mine are older, and my oldest daughter, one of the books that I wrote has a lot of true things that happened, and I used a lot of things that happened in her life. And she said that one was difficult for her to get into. My second book has a lot of family history type stuff in it. So I have a grandfather that fought in World War II, and there's a lot of that. And she would be reading it, and then she would call me and say, did this really happen in our family? And I was like, no, that one's fiction. But my third book, although there's a lot of me in it, there isn't any real family connection. Right. And she said that one she was able to actually read and forget who wrote it.
Interesting.
And so it might come with a little more time, but you also have to remember this is your 8-year-old, and your 8-year-old's looking at it as, Dad's doing what? He's writing a book,
Well, first of all, she's in 8th grade, luckily. An 8-year-old would be, I have a...
Oh, 8th grade. I'm sorry. Okay.
It's funny you mentioned, because I had my 10-year-old she's 11 now, but she was 10 when it first came out. And she got through the first 2 chapters. She's like, this book's hilarious. I'm like, wait, hilarious?
What?
Like, what do you mean hilarious? She got through 3 chapters. She's like, that's a funny book, Dad. Good job. I'm like, all right. Maybe.
Yeah, we're done now.
That's fine. I mean, thank you. I'll take the compliment. Tell your friends' parents to check it out. But
yeah,
tell them
it's not a middle grade book, is what we're telling us, right? So, all right. So what's next for you, Ben? Are you done writing? Was this a one and done, or do you have more ideas now?
I didn't expect to write one. So right. Yeah. So then when I got to the end of this, the first thing I did once it was done was I started recording the audiobook. And that process, like, I know that a lot of people have had the experience of hearing their own voice, like on voicemail, and it drives you nuts. Now imagine having a 16-hour audiobook and having to like listen back to it to make sure there's no errors. It was murderous listening to your voice for that long. And I'd say when I was around the 14-hour mark of doing the reviews, which takes into account 30 hours of recording.
Exactly.
When I was around that point, an idea occurred to me, and I'm like, oh no, not this again. And I got so excited about it, and I developed this idea for a couple of weeks, and then I got to the end of it, and I was rereading it, and I was like, wait, this is the plot to Cowboys versus Aliens, the Daniel Craig movie. I'm like, that he made in between James Bond movies. It was a horrible movie, horrendous. And I thought, oh no, I've been playing around with this idea like for 2 weeks, threw it completely away. So they're like, all right, well, I'll see if anything else happens. And literally the same night, that same day after I threw it away that evening, the second idea came to me, which was when Lewis and Clark went west. They were gone, went from St. Louis to the Pacific and back to the St. Louis and then to Washington, D.C. They were gone from St. Louis for 826 days. And their orders said to keep a record of everything that happened along the way. And Meriwether Lewis, who was in control, only wrote a journal for 440 of those days, including 10 and a half months when he wrote nothing. And we know that there's nothing lost because he gets to the bottom of one page and signs off, and then 10 and a half months later, picks up on the next page. Doesn't explain it, doesn't say anything. And I'm using those gaps to explore, what were those boys doing for all those days they weren't writing things. What was out west that was so important that they stopped writing and stopped doing and were pursuing something? We know they got to the Pacific and we know they got back, but what happened in the middle? And what was happening in the lead up that made that disappearing act possible? And I've found that if we kind of know the first 10% of the story, and then there's a big gap, and then we know like what happened from 60 to 80%, and then we don't know what happened from 85 to 95%. There's some really interesting stories you can tell while still having to come back to reality because of the things that are part of the record. So this book has gotten unwieldy in its length, but I've had so much more fun writing this one than the first one, which is weird, but I didn't know what I didn't know on the first one. And now I'm using all those lessons to make this second one even better.
Do you have any idea when you hope to have this one out?
I would love to have it out. See, we're in almost the middle of July right now. I'd love to have it out this time next year.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, good. I'm glad to know that you're continuing to write, because I enjoyed Chandelier a lot. Like it was well written. I enjoyed it. I had fun reading it. And I think that you continuing to write is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, for someone who's just dropping in on this particular episode, I've read one of your books already. What's the fourth one looking like for you?
Oh, so I'm trying something totally different. I'm one of these people that I hate being put in a box. And so I have this contemporary humorous thing going on in my head. And it's about a woman going through menopause. And it's hot flashes and leaving her phone in the refrigerator and can't find her glasses and all of the things that women who've experienced it can laugh at as long as it's not happening to them. And so I don't know, it's a very funny look. And the idea came to me because of a book I read as a child, which was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And Margaret was going through puberty. Mm-hmm. And my thought was, wonder whatever happened to Margaret. And my next thought is she goes by Peg and she's going through menopause, and bam. And then and this book is very much me. It's my voice without a doubt. I'm a little bit sarcastic and a little tongue in cheek and a little, and all of that really comes out. And I'm having a ball writing it. It's a lot of fun.
That does sound like a lot of fun.
Will it go anywhere? I have no idea, but boy, am I having fun writing it.
Well, that's awesome. I can't wait to see that one. And that sounds also like a good gift to give as well.
Yeah.
Like if you have a mom or an aunt who is, approaching that part of their life, that seems like a great birthday, Christmas gift kind of thing. Just
something. And it's just a funny way to look at something that you have to go through that isn't necessarily a lot of fun, but it's funny. Right. Like if you listen to comedians can bring it up, and those kinds of things. And it's because there is a lot of funny to it. It's just not funny at the moment it's happening to you. When you find your own phone in the refrigerator, you're exasperated. But when you find out that someone else has done it, it's funny, and so there's that to it.
I do like the idea of a person being in the kitchen and feeling like they keep hearing a phone ring and not being able to track it down. And then after the seventh ring, when they go to get some milk, they're like, oh, damn it.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. And so I just use a lot of things that have actually happened to me. I mean, I was on the phone with my daughter the other day. We were chatting. I had it tucked up here because I was doing things, and I'm now getting ready to leave. And so I'm putting things in my purse and I'm looking for my phone.
Right.
And I'm talking to my daughter and I'm looking and I don't see it in my purse. And I think, well, did I leave it out in the car? So I go out to the car and I'm looking, no, it's not in the car. So I come back in the house and I'm thinking, okay, where was I? Well, let me look in the bathroom, and I'm not saying it out loud. I'm still having my conversation. And it was after about 6 minutes of looking that I thought, oh, for goodness sakes, the phone is sitting right here on my shoulder. And so it's those kinds of things.
Right.
And it is funny when you talk about it, like you're laughing. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. It's not funny when it's happening, but it is extremely funny when you can stand back and look. So
yeah,
absolutely.
See, that's the human condition, Tara. You got it. You nailed it.
Absolutely. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have an opportunity to win a digital copy of Chandelier. Just tell us something you liked or loved about this conversation, and you will be in the running. Ben, if someone wanted to get in contact with you, talk with you about your writing or the book, how do they do that?
The website I have set up for the book itself and for me is benhawken.com, HAWKEN. Or just the email address, ben@benhawken.com. It's very creative. Really went on a limb creatively with that one.
I
And
love
then,
it.
there's Facebook and Instagram as well, easy to find on there.
Super, super. And I'll have all those links in the show notes, guys. Run out and grab the book. You're going to love it. And Ben, thank you so much for being part of the show today.
Terry, this is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.